In 1984 by George Orwell, the protagonist Winston and all the citizens of Oceania are being deprived of accurate information due to the government. He tried to remember in what year he had first heard the mention of Big Brother. He thought it must have been at some time in the 60s. There was no knowing how much of this legend was true and how much invented. It was not true, for example, as was exclaimed in the party history books, that the party invented airplanes. But you could prove nothing. There was never any evidence. Orwell 35-36. And if all others accepted the lie which the party imposed, if all records told the same tale, then the lie passed into history and became truth. What controls the past, ran the party slogan, controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. And yet the past, though of its nature alterable, but never been altered. Whatever was true now was true from everlasting to everlasting. It was quite simple. All that was needed was an unending series of victories over your own memory. Reality control. They called it in Newspeak, doublethink. Orwell 34-35. When Winston tries to fight against the government, he gets taken to the Ministry of Love, so no one will ever hear his ideas. And O'Brien tries to change his ideas. Don't worry, Winston. You are in my keeping. For 7 years, I've been watching over you. Now the turning point has come. I shall save you. I shall make you perfect. Orwell 244. In the current world, there are many citizens in many countries protesting against their governments. And unfortunately, in those countries, the citizens do not have the amendments that will allow them for the right to assemble. The governments that are being protested at shut off the internet so the protests happening in their countries don't get shown to the world. Just like how in 1984, if anyone speaks against Big Brother, they'll get sent to the Ministry of Love. Well, no one will ever hear their ideas, because they'll become brainwashed to believe whatever the government is doing is right, which will decrease protests. One of the many countries that turn off the internet due to protest is Iran. In late November of 2019, the government raised the gas prices in Iran up to 300%. In Iran, there are 18 million families struggling on low incomes. Their cash payments are just set to 550,000 rials, or €4.01 per person. Due to this, many Iranian citizens chant against their government, set banks and police stations on fire in protest. 100 Iranian citizens were killed, hundreds were wounded, and more than 7,000 Iranian citizens were arrested by police in an attempt to stop protest. The leader of Iran, Khomeini, said that unfortunately some problems were caused, and a number of people lost their lives and some centers were destroyed. And even though the protests still continued, he said that the price of fuel must be implemented. The Iranian government shut down the internet to stop the flow of information and to stop video demonstrations from being leaked. David Kay, the UN rapporteur on the promotion and protection of the right to freedom and opinion and expression, told CNN that the blackouts make it harder for people to organize and harder for people to protest. The government made it impossible for friends to communicate overseas and in the country. This is not the first time Iran has shut down the internet. On January 8, 2020, Iran shut down a Ukrainian passenger plane. There are 176 people on board, and all the people on board died. Protests first gathered on Saturday, people angrily demanding that the country's supreme leader step down after the government admitted it had unintentionally shut down the Ukrainian passenger plane. Crowds of college students chanted for Iran's Revolutionary Guards to let go of the country. It also mentioned that the deceased general of Iran, Soleimani, the protesters saying that he was a murderer, and his leader is too. Riot police had massed out in Tehran University at the squares and landmarks across the capital as the calls circulated for demonstrations. Iran shut off the internet again to keep videos of the protests from being leaked. Iran said that they did not hurt any protesters. President Donald Trump tweeted, "To the leaders of Iran, do not kill your protesters. Thousands have already been killed or imprisoned by you, and the world is watching. More importantly, the USA is watching. Turn your internet back on and let reporters roam free. Stop killing your great Iranian people." After the internet was turned back on, a video got released of a woman being shot due to her protest against the Iranian regime. Iran is not the only country guilty of turning off their internet to protesters. India shut off the internet over 95 times in the past year. One reason was due to a controversial citizen law which allowed immigrants to come to India if they practice Hinduism, Buddhism, and Christianity, which pointedly excludes Islam, a faith practiced by 200 million Indian citizens. The government said it was for humanitarian measures. However, there has been rumors that Prime Minister Narendra Modi wants India to be a Hindu nation where Muslims are second-class citizens. Protests began in the streets of India, and the government also resorted to turning off the internet. A Muslim protester named Yasin said that it's better we stop this government from oppressing us before it is too late. India not only blocked the internet in Assam, where protesters started, but they also shut down the internet in other parts of India, including the capital, New Delhi. Pavan Dugal, an attorney and cyber law expert, said that he could not remember a previous instance when the internet was shut down in New Delhi. He also said that it was counterproductive. Neelish John, a lawyer and one of the organizers of the protests, said that over 5,000 protesters were detained for several hours. Although it seems like nothing can be done with this situation, there are things that we can do to help. So the main problem with this issue is that the citizens in the countries where the internet's being shut off cannot fix the problem by more protests, because it is very likely that the government will shut off the internet again. However, we can solve this problem by starting protests in countries where people have the freedom to protest and need to use their ability to start helping others who unfortunately do not have the same amendments to protect them. The more protests there are, the more people will notice the problem. Then our protests will be heard by governments. Other governments will hear and can boycott goods sold by countries that shut off the internet due to protest. If more and more countries boycott the goods of the countries that shut off the internet, then those governments and countries will not have a stable economy and have no other choice but to listen and solve the problem.